You're listening to the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast, the leading resource for real estate investors who want to dominate their market online. Dan Barrett is the founder of AdWords Nerds, a high-tech digital agency focusing exclusively on helping real estate investors like you get more leads and deals online, outsmart your competition, and live a freer, more awesome life. And now, your host, Dan Barrett.
All right, hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast. As always, this is Daniel Barrett here from AdWordsNerds.com. And look, if you need more deals, you need more leads online for your real estate investing business, you go to AdWordsNerds.com, jump on a call with someone from my team, and we will help you put together a marketing strategy for your market. All right, folks, this week, I have the one and only Eddie Wilson on the show. Now, Eddie is a truly, I've had a lot of great business owners and entrepreneurs on this show, incredibly successful people that I really look up to and take a lot out of. But Eddie is kind of like on another level. Man, he is doing a million different things. First of all, as he says, right, he is a hardcore real estate investor, first and foremost. 3 generations of real estate folks in his family, right? So that's in his blood. But at the same time, he's done 150 different exits from businesses. Forbes called him the king of exits. He's doing nonprofit work. He's a venture capitalist. He's investing in businesses. He's doing so many different things, doing them consistently and doing them extremely well. And one of the things I always look out for in terms of people to listen to or take advice from, right? It's not just people who are successful because, of course, you can be successful by accident, right? You just, whatever, you happen to buy that one, crypto coin that your friend said was going to blow up, and it blew up, and then you sold it the day after it made $1 billion and never make another good decision in your life. Like, that can happen. What's so impressive to me about Eddie is that he is consistently, over time, making incredibly smart decisions, starting businesses that run without him that he can exit from. These are the skill sets of a master entrepreneur. And I had a ton of insights from this conversation. I know you are as well. You can find Eddie, by the way, at his website. You can go to officialew.com to get links to all his stuff. He's got so many different businesses and everything. You should go check that out at officialew.com. But without any further ado, let's get into my interview with Eddie Wilson. I am here with Eddie Wilson from officialew.com, and anywhere you get your social media, you can find him as well at Eddie Wilson Official. Eddie, welcome to the show, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to being on the show.
Yeah, I am too, man. We were just talking kind of before we hit record. You have got a lot going on. You are a multifaceted person. You're a real estate investor, but you're also doing a ton of stuff that's not real estate investing. So for people who aren't maybe familiar with you or with your businesses, give us like the 30,000 foot overview of like who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, really, I exist in 3 buckets, right? Like I'm a corporate leader. We have a private equity firm. We have about 27 companies under that private equity firm. So I'm the leader of those. I'm the CEO. And then I'm a investor, right? So hardcore real estate investor, 3rd generation. And it's not just real estate, it's businesses. I buy businesses, I buy opportunities, I invest passively. I do a lot of multifamily investing. And then kind of the 3rd bucket is altruist. So everything I do, you get to a place in life where really you have enough stuff. You've created legacy for your family for generations. And so we're in this phase of life where it's just about give back. And so all of my investing is with the intent of giving a large chunk of that away. So we have a foundation called Impact Others. And so everything we do, whether we're buying, selling companies or buying, selling real estate, it's all for the intent of creating just more capital to go out and do greater things around the world.
Wow, that's super cool. Okay, so I want to get to that. I want to go back to, you kind of glossed over this, but there's a lot in that description, right? So like when you go to like if you're like a cocktail party or something, and you're like hanging out, it's like, so what do you do? Like, how do you describe that? What do you, like, how would you describe, let me ask this a different way.
Okay.
What do you really do? Because like on the outside, you do a lot, like you're an investor, but like when you think about like what you actually do, like what makes you good at what you do, the core of your skill set, like what is it? Because you're all over.
Sure. Yeah. And all over the place and doing a million things. And that is the hardest question I think I ever get asked. And most of the times I just resort to, I'm an investor, right? Like that's the easiest thing to talk about. Because whether I'm investing in, companies or assets or people's lives, like that really is what I do. So I would think that what sets me apart though is Forbes called me the king of exits. And the reason they called me that was because I've exited 120 companies, not companies that are like, oh, I've got one employee, companies that I've had like 4,000 employees in. And I believe in building things that have lasting value and selling them for exponential value. What you do in that is you actually shrink down time to give you a lot of your life back. Most people, they build a business that takes them their entire life, they sell that business or they have some sort of succession plan, and they don't get to live life to the fullest until they turn 65, 70, 75 years old. When I learned at an early age that I could build a business or I could, buy a real estate project and I could turn it into a much higher value and then sell it for exponential value. Essentially, when I buy a business and I make that business perform and I sell it on a 5 multiple or 7 multiple, essentially what they're saying is like, here's 7 years of your life back because if I operated that business for the next 7 years, they're essentially giving me that payment in advance for the value of this company. And so that's what I do at scale. And I think that's probably what sets me apart and probably what I do best.
The time thing is super cool. I never really thought about it like that. But I mean, it's really true. I mean, you're essentially saying like, hey, we're just going to pay you out as if you had worked at this company for 7 straight years.
Right.
And then you can go and do something else with that extra time. And it's basically get to live those, I mean, in a goofy way, right? Live those years multiple times over, if that kind of makes any sense.
Multiple times over. It's one of the things that clicked in my head. My dad was a big stickler on time. Like he always would say, Eddie, if time's your most valuable asset, then why don't you manage your time more than you manage your money? Or why don't you look at your calendar more than you look at your bank account? And so I grew up in a home of an entrepreneur who was hyper focused on time. And the very first company that I sold, I actually was taken advantage of in a major way. I was sitting there with a bunch of big institutional investors who forced me into this acquisition. And while I did make millions of dollars, I probably left 20 or 30 million on the table. Wow. But as they gave me 24 hours to make a decision. I was driving back into the city the next day, kind of thinking through. I had already made the choice. I really didn't have a choice. So I made the choice to get okay with what was happening. And I made the choice. I said, you know what? Like it changed perspective. It was like, you know what? They're giving me a 7 times multiple on my EBITDA, so I'm essentially, if I did the same thing every day for the next 7 years, that's the money I would earn. If nothing grew, nothing diminished. And so therefore they're essentially giving me 7 years of my life back. When that perspective changed, it was like, oh, I want to do this over and over and over again. And then I'm not going to be taken advantage of anymore. I'm going to learn this game like I didn't understand at the time. Yeah. And so that was my driving force. And then, you think about it, most people wait their entire lifetime to go do what they actually want to do, whether it's give philanthropically or just go travel the world. And I thought, you know what, if I could actually create a process for this and do this over and over again, I do get to live my life way in advance. I get to do the things I want to do. And that's what's led to all the nonprofit activity.
Want to find motivated seller leads online, but don't know where to start? Download our free Motivated Seller Keyword Report today. AdWords nerds have spent over $5 million this year researching the most profitable keywords for finding motivated seller leads. And you can grab these exact keywords when you download our report at www.adwordsnerds.com/keywords. So there's like a million places I want to take this conversation, but I want to stay there just for a second. I want to ask about like a phrase that you used. You said, so you had this thing where they forced you into this acquisition that you didn't really, want to do. And you said you're in the car and you made a choice to get okay with it. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that? Because I can imagine, being in that scenario and being like just bitter for like 20 straight years. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that's an easily imaginable alternative outcome. Yes. So how do you make a choice to get okay with something like that? Or what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So I'd have to unpack it a little bit, and I'll do it in this way. I had massive loss in my early life. I lost a sister and I lost a brother. And with my parents, they both had extreme emotional intelligence. And my mom would take me down this path of she would, I would be hurting, I would be struggling, I'd be crying, I'd be missing my sister, the first loss I had. And she would constantly take me down this place of gratitude. And it was very much like, hey, like I know you're hurting, but like, what do you think about like, what was your favorite toy that you and Rebecca used to play with, or what was your favorite memory? And she would just constantly take me back into this place of like positive reinforcement and gratitude for all that I had with my sister. And what happened in that was it flipped a switch in my brain where I realized that every loss or every problem really creates a fork in the road. And that fork in the road is either, I go right, and if I go right, it's a ceiling. It's now a self limitation. And that's where most entrepreneurs live. They hit some roadblock or they hit some problem, and it becomes their ceiling, right? Or you get to take another path, and that is if you can find gratitude in whatever the loss is, whatever the problem is, if you can find gratitude for it, then you begin to learn the lessons of what the loss was giving you, and it becomes a catalyst. In life, gratitude in life's problems can either, gratitude will take you faster and further than you ever dreamed, because what happens is in gratitude, you begin to assimilate all of the lessons with the right mindset. So that was the process I was going through that morning. The story I won't necessarily bore you with, but basically I had an advertising agency, very large one, had a bunch of big contracts, and I had signed a really large contract that I needed capital for. I was young, didn't really know how to source capital. I'm talking to an investment banker. He says, "Oh, I've got your capital for you." Never really thought to ask like, well, where is the capital coming from? Or, I looked at terms and I thought, oh, okay, I'm good with those terms. And basically the 23rd hour, it was revealed to me that it was the world's largest advertising agency that really just wanted to buy my contracts. They took me all the way down to the wire. So I overextended myself, had to put out about $30 million in ad spend on contractually. It would bankrupt my firm if I didn't go through contractually with what I obligated myself for or to, and I needed the capital to do it. And then they came and said, "Hey, by the way, we know that you're in this situation, and so today we're not going to give you this capital. We're actually going to buy you, and we're going to buy you at these terms," right? Well, I was on a path of potentially selling later on, but it was kind of a forced acquisition. They played the game like nobody I'd ever been exposed to. I didn't understand the game. And so, at first I fought it. Like I was like, "Nope, you're not going to do this to me. I'm going to go get lawyers. I'm going to, like, it's like all this stuff." And they just kind of like smiled at me like, no, like we do this all the time. This is how this works, And so I realized like they're playing a game I didn't understand. And so in the car, they gave me 24 hours really to like get right with it, sign the docs, let's move on. So I'm driving back into the city with all of that on my shoulders. And it was that choice. It was like, I knew I was at that fork in the road. And it was like, you either find gratitude for the situation you're in, or you just start like, I can't believe these guys are taking advantage of me. Like you said, this bitterness, let this bitterness set in. Like, these people are stealing something from me. And then bitterness creates identity, right? Like anytime you see somebody that gets like exponentially bitter about whatever it is, it becomes their identity because they become consumed with it. So then they can't help it. It just comes out of them. And I started thinking through, okay, how do I find gratitude for the situation I'm in? Yes, it's not what I want to do. Yes, I got taken advantage of. And the one thing I could come up with that made sense to me was like, oh, I actually get 7 years of my life back. Like, then I was like, oh, I can find gratitude in that. And then I started thinking the thoughts of like, if I had 7 years of my life, if I had all the revenue that it was going to take me to create over the next 7 years, and I get to actually do it, what would I do with that? And then it was like, then it was like pouring gas on a fire, right? Gratitude creates a catalyst. And that's what it did in my life in that moment.
That is just such a wild story. And I literally like felt sick when you're just like the part where they're like, yeah, we do this all the time. I'm like, ugh. So it's like, I think that's it's a powerful story because it's like, it's not just like, oh, this annoying thing happened. Right. So I think the ability to turn around it is so awesome. I want to ask about, you mentioned you're a third generation real estate investor.
I am.
You also mentioned kind of growing up in the house with your dad, who's an entrepreneur. What was it like kind of coming up in that environment? Because like one of the things about that is I always feel I have a little bit of imposter syndrome about, and I think a lot of investors have this as well. It's like if you grow up, your family is not particularly entrepreneurial. Like I always just thought of myself as like, I'm not really a business guy. Right. Like I was like, I'm a musician, I'm a this, I'm a that. And so did you kind of come out of the womb being like, I'm a business person? Like, what was that like?
No,
No, so
ironically, my dad and my mom are both entrepreneurs. They both own their own businesses.
wow.
Both are just kind of, so I did get something by osmosis for sure, right? Like it permeated somewhere. And I actually rejected it. I went into college, thought I'm gonna go to corporate. Like these guys, they struggle so much. Like, but I'll tell you that the greatest gift my mom ever gave me was this relationship with gratitude. It's what I talked about a minute ago. The thing that my dad gave me was a healthy respect for time, like I spoke about, shrinking down your time, focusing on what matters. But the other thing that he gave me that I think a lot of entrepreneurs miss is he gave me a healthy respect for fear and also the opportunities that come with making right choices. What I mean by that is there's a time that I can go back in my mind where we had very little, like Christmas, where like no presents, like that kind of like a moment as an entrepreneur. And I know that those were the moments that my father looks back on in his life and felt like a failure, right? But for me, my dad was always a great dad. He was present in my life. He spent time with me. Yeah, he worked sun up, sun down, but he was there in the important moments. Like he was there when I needed him. And so what I watched was his ability to just go for it. And then what he might look at as a failure, I still look at it and go, well, man, when we didn't have anything, I still had my dad and I still felt great about it. And that really didn't bother me. So like I look at it and think, well, what's the worst that can happen? I take this choice and I lose everything and I still get to spend time with my kids. And,
Yeah.
it's like, so he gave me this like relationship with fear that I don't think most people have. Like, I don't have this fear of like, oh, if I put it on the line and I lose everything, I'm giving all this up. I have this kind of like feeling like, well, what's the worst that can happen? I could, end up spending more time with family. Like, okay, that's a good thing, And so all of that really inspired me to make action or take action later in life. I left corporate to pursue entrepreneurship. And it was his example that allowed me to overcome what most people struggle to overcome, which is like, what happens if this all goes bad? And I oftentimes will say, especially from stage, it's like children deserve to watch their parents chase their dreams. I know oftentimes there's so much conversation about work-life balance and how much time should you spend with the kids, or should you be at every soccer game and every basketball game? And the greatest gift my dad ever gave me wasn't coming to every basketball game or every football game. The greatest gift he ever gave me was him chasing his dreams with reckless abandon, because it allowed me to chase mine at a level that I don't think I would have. My personality is actually probably less risky than maybe his is. However, I have a different perspective on risk. And so I am chasing my dreams. My children are watching me chase my dreams. And so I think we just put prioritization on interesting things. Like I don't look back at my life and go, man, I can't believe you missed that 7th game of my 8th grade year. Like I wish you would have been there. Like I think like, yeah, he was there and present every time I needed him. There's never a time where I felt like, man, I wish my dad was here. He was there in those moments. And I watched him chase his dreams with reckless abandon. And he gave me a great path to success.
Well, let me transition then a little bit, because you're talking about, this, your dad gave you this relationship with fear and this kind of sense of, like what's the worst that could happen? And one of the questions that I always want to ask investors, particularly people who invest in all kinds of things, like you said, you buy businesses, you invest in real estate, like you do private equity. Mm-hmm. And this is a broad question. You can take it anywhere.
Okay.
But what is your relationship to risk? You even mentioned like your dad, like kind of pursuing his dreams. I mean, you said like reckless abandon, right? Like every investor has a particular kind of relationship to risk. How do you think you relate to risk?
I believe that real estate or any type of investing should be done without emotion. I believe that so much of risk is based on our emotions, and typically that emotion is either hope of gain or fear of loss, right? Like you take every real estate investor and their underwriting strategy is tied to, I hope I get this, or I hope I don't lose this. For me, it's a very pragmatic approach. I have this, I want to put it into something that gains value. So therefore, I'll put it into whatever makes the most sense without emotion. So like, for instance, I have a quadrant system that every quarter my CFO and I sit down and go through. And it's like, okay, here's my extra cash. Here's what I want to invest, whether it's to avoid taxation or it's to just find, a yield. And we put it into buckets of risk. Like, okay, and one of my business partners, Dan Fleischman, he teaches the 40-40-20 rule, which is like, you should be putting 40% of your investment dollars into things that are just going to yield in a lower amount, but the risk is so small. Then you should be putting things into, kind of medium risk, medium yield. And then he teaches you really should consider at least putting 20% of your investment dollars into things that have exponential gain. Like the things that you say, boy, I wish I would have put money into that because look at it now, it's like, and so I think there are things like crypto and venture capital and stuff like that I put in. So like I have a very pragmatic approach to investing. I put my real estate investing primarily into that middle upper, like that top bucket and middle bucket. So the reason I have 4,000 doors is because, or over 4,000 doors is because I put so much emphasis on those top two. And then I carve off this small piece and I'm buying private equity or I'm buying crypto or I'm trying something new. And it's like going to Vegas, it's like, I hope something comes out of it. Now, I've done very well in that last kind of 20%. But I teach a lot of investors to have a relationship with their money that is a pragmatic relationship, not an emotional relationship. So much of our activity is based on kind of consumer-based thinking. All media is teaching us to how to be consumers, right? It's like, oh, you should be careful here. You should not do this here. And if you follow kind of general media practices, you're going to actually make decisions that are opposite of how an investor should think, right? Like you hear like Warren Buffett, and the reason people quote Warren Buffett so much is because he's a contrarian thinker. He's like, when everybody else is running out, you should be boldly running in, and it's like, and that's because we all listen to mass media. We listen to the economics that are kind of spouted on all media channels, and then we make consumer-based decisions, right? And so I take my consumer money, like this is what it takes me to live, eat, breathe, whatever, it's like, and then I take my investment money, and that is not emotional in the transactions of it. It's logical. Like my underwriting is very logical. And then I break it down into risk quadrants and then I decide where to put this money. And so whether that, and I've been doing this for years. So it didn't like, it used to be maybe I had 100 grand that I had to spread out between the 40-40-20, right? It's like, and now maybe I have 10 million to put into that 40-40-20. And so I don't have a relationship with the dollar amount. I have a relationship with the risk quadrant that I'm putting it into. So then once we underwrite it and go, oh, this really fits inside of this bucket. It's like, oh, okay, then I'll put whatever that amount is in there. Like I don't think, should I really put $2 million into this? It's like, well, I have 2 million that has to go in this quadrant. This is the one that makes sense. Let's let's go. So that's how I invest.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed part 1 of this episode. It's just too good to limit to one show. Join us next week to hear the rest.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.